Hello, and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me today is Casey Harper, the Center Square's Washington, D.C. bureau chief. Because of the Easter holiday, we are recording this a day early on Thursday, April 6th this week. Casey, you've been covering what at least critics call the woke federal government, how President Biden's administration has been inserting, equity, fairness, inclusion issues into national policy, federal policy. You broke another story this week regarding that. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, this story is about a little known but well-funded federal agency called NIST. It's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a federal technology office that helps with, inventions, helps us stay competitive with, nations like China. It's innovation, it's science, that kind of thing. It works with scientists a lot. We uncovered some pretty interesting details about, of course, they're taxpayer funded, about their gender and speech codes and how they've directed their scientists, what they can and can't say in reports. And a lot of it really toes the line of the liberal gender ideology and critical race theory doctrines that have become really controversial and really popular among federal agencies. I mean, some of the, most interesting examples, the scientists can't use the terms blacklist or whitelist, which are really, common in tech and computer science and things, blacklist and whitelist, because of the racial connotations, which just objectively, those words, the origins of those words have no racial. In their initial conception in English, they had no racial meaning. And the words actually predate the United States of America as a whole. So it's not like these words were invented in the antebellum South or something. So I think that's worth noting. But, and then there's stuff about gender, like you can't use, if you've ever worked like an electrician or something, all about male and female connectors, but you're not allowed to use under these speech codes. You can't assign gender to kind of these physical objects. And so these are just two examples of the kind of thing that's going on. So you might say, well, why does this matter? I mean,
what does this have to do with science?
Right. Well, exactly. And then the bigger thing is, this is a big part of a very large trend. Why I'm personally interested in this is because these ideas, of course, around critical race theory and also gender ideology are only becoming more controversial, not less controversial. Some issues, they start out controversial and over time, the American people kind of come around. But gender and critical race theory is not like that, actually. And in the story, I cite a Pew Research, which shows that over the last 5 years or so, Americans have actually become less convinced about gender ideology. So, for instance, now 60% of Americans say a person's gender is actually determined by their sex assigned at birth, which of course is the complete opposite of what is taught in a lot of universities about gender intersectionality. But that 60% is actually higher. It's been rising since 2017. So in the last few years, Americans have become more and more skeptical of gender ideology. And of course, critical race theory has become more and more controversial. But even with that really unsettled question by the American public, federal agencies are fully embracing this to the tune of millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. And so that's where we come in and why I'm interested in it. We cover the taxpayer angle at thecentersquare.com. And if you're listening to this, your taxpayer dollars are funding these kind of reports, these kind of ideas, these federal agencies, which really receive very little supervision from Congress or anyone else. The inspector generals sometimes write reports that hardly anyone reads. It's kind of a wild west, and they're spending this money and they've totally embraced intersectionality. And this report is just one of many, examples we've been writing about.
You've covered similar types of stories about this ideology that the Biden administration is putting on, for example, through the Department of Defense and the Pentagon and what they're doing with the military. Briefly summarize that.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of examples. I mean, NIH, National Institute of Health, has funded. I wrote a story a while back about the researching, spending millions of dollars on equity issues and advancing LGBT ideas instead of their core purpose, which is researching medical cures. And you referenced the Pentagon, which is a great example. The Pentagon really got a lot of flack, no pun intended, in recent weeks because of how they've been spending millions and millions of dollars on diversity, equity, inclusion offices, putting books about white privilege in the military school libraries, because military school, for military families and things like that. So much money goes into training and diversity, equity, inclusion, which is the buzzword for the offices within federal agencies that advance these ideas. And they're spending, this isn't small amounts of money. It's millions and millions of dollars going towards this stuff. And this is all while the Pentagon, for example, is having a lot of trouble meeting the weapons requests of Ukraine. It's really the Ukraine conflict has exposed that our Pentagon is not nearly as prepared to meet some of these weapons requests as many would have hoped. So we're already, running out of things like Stinger missiles, and we can't make them fast enough to supply Ukraine, which of course has its own is alarming for its own reasons, as far as our national defense, and also very illuminating if we ever did something like try to defend Taiwan, which would be very risky, very, very difficult logistically because Taiwan's on the other side of the world, right in China's backyard. And so it's starting to raise the question, would we even be able to if we wanted to? I mean, let alone would it be in American interest? So Pentagon's having all these issues dealing with all these problems. And on the side, they're just siphoning off millions of dollars to gender and CRT kind of things.
Now, this week, you uncovered the same kind of thing with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I know you're going to keep digging into this story. Casey, what are the federal government's priorities and what should they be? Anyway, we are out of time. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Casey Harper, I'm Dan McCaleb. Thank you for listening.